What are some other misunderstandings that you've heard about this generation?
They want to be there for you, and they want to develop themselves and become the best versions of themselves that they can possibly be. They need help doing it.
And then, all of us are kind of learning the AI stuff over the last couple of years. And I'm just wondering, because they are probably quicker to adapt to technology and use it to their advantage, both at work and in life, what they're doing with it right now and how it's going to change their career development.
My hunch is that when people say they're lazy or they want to get done, they get done. They only want to work 8 hours or 6 hours. It could be that they're more efficient than we ever were.
Kat, it is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
It's funny, on your LinkedIn, your headline is you're a Gen Z-ologist. What does that mean?
So we've talked a little bit, I'm a research nerd, and ologists in general are more science or data driven. So everything that I talk about when it comes to Gen Z, not everything, I shouldn't say that, but most of what I talk about when it comes to Gen Z and trying to solve problems for corporations in Gen Z is backed by data. So I'm a Gen Z-ologist. I study them so much. I love them, they're my thing.
And a lot of business leaders and owners are not really being able to understand this generation. So we're going to unpack that today. And you said you're a data nerd, so self-proclaimed, and you passed me a statistic that said, I think it's by chief executive, that 63% of CEOs are focusing on employee engagement in 2024. That's great, right? But Gen Z is the generation that is kind of being left behind, and they're finding challenges in engaging this group. So why is that?
I think there's a couple of things. One of the big issues is that while they have a lot of information about Gen Z, they don't know what to do with the information. And so it runs throughout the whole HR department, right? It begins with attracting Gen Z. Everybody wants to do what they're good at. And yet we still, in corporations, we create job postings that are skill-based and very little inherent attributes or any kind of a value-based attribute is put in a job posting. Yet those are the things that really make people thrive and get really excited about doing a job. You see that sometimes in nonprofits. People get really, really jazzed up about their role because they have an emotional attachment to it. So I think organizations that take the information that they have and then maybe massage their current processes a little bit to support what they know about Gen Z will find a lot of success.
That's interesting. So you're saying it starts before they even become an employee of an organization. Is you can engage them early on by connecting them to the role and to the organization. And that's really what they want.
It's putting them in the right role to begin with. You are well aware of the number of the resignations that we have and how quickly it happens within the first 30 days. And then within the first 90 days, I think it's 25 and then almost a third within the first 90 days. And that has a lot to do with just not being in the right role, the one that isn't suiting them properly. And I think if we can continue we need those skill-based postings, but then to build a little bit further, a little bit deeper by saying, okay, these are the attributes that really will help you excel in these roles. And it's very well documented that things like emotional intelligence create higher performance and better leaders. So it's nothing new. It's just that we haven't really embraced it to the extent that I think we could.
How does Gen Z's approach to work vary from the generations before it, if at all?
Yes, the first thing is that they're very focused on holistic well-being. So I think you've probably heard this in the media. It's been talked about quite a bit. I think we even talked about it before, but where in my generation, you had a career and everything aligned with your career. So where you lived, when you took vacations, even when you had children, it had to map back to your career. They're flipping that upside down and they're saying, no, my career is equally as important as it always was, but it should align with all those other things that are important to me, my lifestyle, where I live, when I have children. They should align. It shouldn't be one dictating and overruling everything else. So Gen Z, there's a misconception, I think, in the world that Gen Z doesn't have ambition and doesn't want to work and they're lazy and all kinds of things. That's not exactly it. The issue is that they believe that there should be some sort of compatibility between their lifestyle and their careers. They really, really highly value learning and development. 84% of Gen Z thinks that learning and development is as important or more important than a job title or a promotion. So they want to be there for you and they want to develop themselves and become the best versions of themselves that they can possibly be. They need help doing it.
What are some other misunderstandings that you've heard about this generation? I mean, you mentioned that there's misconceptions around them being lazy or not caring about work and all those, but what other things that you hear that are just not matching the data that you're
I think that that people think that they're terrible communicators. And I don't believe that they are terrible communicators. They communicate differently, but that doesn't make it worse. They definitely have a different method to communicate, and the way that they speak is different. It's a lot more direct. Sometimes it's off-putting to older generations because they don't use the same formality that older generations did. But this is also nothing new. Each generation has that same issue with the prior generation. But there's just a ton of them, Brendan. I mean, there's a ton of them that they aren't ambitious is one that's insane. If you go into any college campus, you can't believe how ambitious these people are. It's remarkable. I mean, to even get in, I probably wouldn't even get into college. It's much harder to get in than it was. So they definitely have ambition.
What are some of the most standout qualities that you've seen in this generation that any employer would be lucky to
Curiosity, fresh ideas, innovation. When one of my favorite things to see is when organizations do a really, really good job of bringing teams together that cross generations and cross functions, because that's when the real beauty of the younger people gets, you see these ideas start to bounce off each other. The older generations with their incredible experience and the younger generations that are dreaming so big and thinking so huge, but yet don't have exactly the experience to understand that maybe some of their ideas are unaffordable or, that kind of, that's another training. That's another huge lesson. I would highly recommend organizations begin to train on their entire organization. So the jobs that I've had, many corporate jobs, and I've never ever been trained on the entire organization, meaning not just a generic version of financial planning reading, but our financials. What do our specific financials look like? Let's talk about it. And then what happens when you're in sales and you make a suggestion to marketing? Can marketing do it? Marketing, when you make a suggestion for sales, can sales do it? So there's a whole lot of misunderstandings and lack of knowledge about what goes on throughout the organization. Most people don't know how a product or service gets from conception to the end consumer. And so they believe, oh, well, let's just change. Why is milk carton still in a carton? That thing's impossible to open when you're in fourth grade. But it's, there's a whole lot of distribution and operational issues with changing the milk carton, and they can't afford it. So there's a lot of misunderstandings.
Something that I've been curious about, and I've talked to some people about regarding this generation, is that they're entering the workforce at a time where there's been a lot of we have the Great Resignation, and then now it's everybody's staying put. Inflation's really high. They probably can't make enough money to be able to buy their first home, pay off their student loans. So they're in this funky situation where costs are really high, and their employer probably can't pay them enough. They don't have the experience yet. Unpack that for me. What have you read and heard about this generation when it comes to money and just being able to survive out there?
Yeah, no, this is a bigger conversation. This is a really kind of to me, a very, very much of a terrifying conversation, because Not only do those young people need to be able to afford life, but the corporations need to be able to withstand all this, right? And all of these changes. Corporations are paying now for environmental issues that have been long since coming, right? For 50 years, we've kind of ruined the environment, and now we're having to pay for it. And so that comes with a cost. So the question about the economy is, to me, one that is still not exactly. I ask every time I talk to an economist, what do you think the impact on our economy is with Gen Z being, having trouble staying in corporations or being attracted to corporations? It's a big concern. I don't think we have an answer on that yet, Brendan, but it's a scary one.
What I hear a lot is that Gen Z, they might work for an employer, but they're also doing the gig economy too. Like they're having to, they have some entrepreneurial tendencies, and they're maybe trying to start a business on the side or something just to try to stay afloat. Yeah,
and that's not just Gen Z. That's every generation. It's about 60% of them have side hustles, and most of those people want that side hustle to be their primary source of income. So they're finding other ways to do it. But that's also because they're not fully engaged at work. So they're looking for other outlets. Mm-hmm. So there is definitely a finance piece of it. But there's a lot that they can that will help if they're developed properly. It's not going to completely go away, the financial piece, but by improving their emotional, their mental, their physical well-being, they can be much more loyal than organizations think. Mental well-being is their top priority. They're very, very focused on mental well-being. So for you to have them feeling really happy and good and emotionally stable and trust that their managers are going to support them, it goes a long way. It really does.
A lot of listeners of this podcast are HR professionals and leaders of organizations. And I like anybody, they're probably trying to figure out how to understand and communicate with this Gen Z. What advice do you have for managers and leaders who really want to connect with this generation?
So that's the same thing that I think that we need to do for the Gen Z themselves is start to boost their attributes. 46% say that their managers are not helping them at all with their career path. And over 60% say that they don't believe that their managers know how. And so, and I don't really agree with those numbers, but it's always about perception, right? So if they believe that, then that's true for them. And those are skills that can be learned. Emotional intelligence, empathy, listening skills. These are things that can be learned and taught. So management that really embraces learning those is going to go a lot further. That is true on the other side too. Gen Z helping or learning their own attributes, right? Learning how to strengthen their own attributes. One of the big things that I think going forward, I'd like to see more of is people owning their own career development. So instead of saying my manager doesn't do this and my HR people don't do this, teaching them, just like we do in healthcare, we were taught that we need to be our own evangelists and we need to, own our own healthcare. I think people need to take a lot more accountability for owning their own personal development and their own career path instead of saying my manager doesn't help me. I mean, that isn't a good response in my mind. And that goes back to communications. Communication, again, you started out by saying what can leaders do? I think communication is one. The ability to be able to talk to each other and really understand each other is one. And I think along with communication is networking. Even within your own organization, really starting to understand each other. I do a lot of programs at universities for teaching people how to network, and it's really a lost art and a very important one. Yeah. It's one of the things that I think that we can easily focus on, easily be taught.
Yeah, it's funny about networking. I often think of like the last several years of like the pandemic and being isolated has definitely reduced my networking skills. And I imagine like with Gen Z, a lot of these, a lot of people in that generation were either in college or maybe finishing up high school at the time, and then went in total isolation and probably never had networking experience other than school programs or whatever. So I'm sure networking is a lost skill for them. How can employers bring them along to that? Because I think it's really important to be networking. It's huge for career development.
It's huge for career. It's not only huge for career development, but it will help you find doctors. It'll help you find vacations. It'll help you maybe find your person in your life. I mean, it's a really, really important thing to do. And I don't think it's just Gen Z. I find it to be true in all levels of the organization. And in my mind, it needs to be very systematic. A lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I network," and that means that once in a while they call up their buddy or they somebody reaches out to them, whatever. But I believe when I teach it very systematically, like your own personal CRM system. So you really track and you make those connections. You build that network before you need it. So you don't just go knocking on someone's door when you need help. You build it for years and years. And then when you do have a request, people are there for you. And the other thing people don't do very well is go back and thank people. Like, let's just say I was asking you for a contact for a new job. Whether I got the job or not doesn't matter. Going back to you and saying, this is the result of your introduction goes a really, really long way. And people just don't do those things anymore. They don't do it systematically. It's really important. Yeah,
that's well said. I think of my own tendencies too. I'm like, if I had a systematic approach to networking, I would probably be more effective. It'd probably make a lot of new important relationships that I didn't have before. So Gen Z, get out there and network. Communication. So with communication with this generation, you said like the perception is that they're not good communicators, but you said they communicate just differently. What are their tendencies as far as communication? So that way employers could really start to figure them out.
Well, there's two sides to that. One is the technology that they use. So that's just, I think, a very obvious one. But the other is the form or the way that they communicate is much more straightforward. And they don't, though people think that Gen Z believes everything they read, it's not true. They are so suspicious and skeptical, and they will not believe you if you don't have some fact to support what you're saying. They just won't. And so and I don't think that's wrong. I mean, they are very good at getting to the real meat and potatoes, I guess, of a conversation. So they'll be direct about it. Sometimes that's not good, right? Because there is a place for being humble and being, I think it's 81% of Gen Z believes that they can write a self-help book. Yikes. I don't think we want Carnegie or Covey to hear that statistic. I mean, that's pretty scary. So communication, when I say communication, I just mean open it up, have the conversations, get all generations in the room. And when something isn't clear, don't make assumptions, ask. Assumptions are the worst thing you can do. So getting a leader and a Gen Z together and having people make assumptions about each other is really dangerous. It's really about opening up communications, just like it is within a family or a friendship, any other relationship. Communication is really the headline for all relationships, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the biggest red flags inside of an organization that would indicate that Gen Z is like not being engaged at the level that maybe other generations are?
I think if you managers that are well trained in identifying and understanding those soft skills with their teams, see them right away. And you can tell when somebody is pulling back or acting differently. It's just like with a child. You've got some kids. The minute you see them behaving differently, that's a sign. So it's not that on day one you're going to get it, but as you watch and you observe, when there's a big change, that's a sign that something's going on. And you really can tell. If you're an observant leader, observant manager, you can see it pretty quickly.
I would imagine too, if you're having turnover with that generation or you can't acquire talent in that generation, then that's a significant red flag in my opinion.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah. And they are also your greatest evangelists. So when they stop talking about you and saying, I'm working for this company and posting things, that's another clear sign.
You mentioned earlier that Gen Z is really known for valuing the work-life balance and putting their mental well-being at the forefront. So how can employers meet their needs on that? Like whether it means flexible work practices or benefits, or like what have you seen like cutting edge employers doing for this generation to make sure that they are meeting the needs on the work-life balance and mental health?
There's a lot of ways to approach that. And one is through training on the attributes that boost emotional well-being. And there's a lot of them. Some of them are very obvious. Gratitude has been well documented as a way to boost emotional well-being. But there are some much more straightforward approaches too that actually can be very easily done through personal knowledge bases through AI too. That's not as complicated as I think some people think it is. It's very easily done. You can teach these people, anybody, to have their own personal AI. And then it tracks it, and then you see when it's coming, you see when there's a decline in it very quickly. But I have one client who has hired an on-staff psychiatrist, actually. She's a psychiatrist. And she does once a month programs. And for somebody like me, it's a little terrifying. It's like, you're kidding me. I don't want to go in there and start confessing everything. But it's amazing how it's worked for this organization. It's the most well-received and highly populated program that they do. This woman has kind of celebrity rock star, pop star status at their organization because so many people from so many generations participate in her programs. So that's, I think, pretty progressive.
You mentioned AI, and like, I imagine this generation in particular is probably dabbling, if not going all in on some of the new technologies that are coming our way. Like, from what you've researched, how are putting tools like that into this generation's hands going to change the future of the workplace?
So that's getting a little bit further out of my area when you start to ask about the workplace. When I think of it in terms of how does it affect the human population at the organization, I see a lot of incredible improvements that are being made. So let's just take gratitude for one. Gratitude journals are very well known. People understand what that is, so it makes an easy example. So you can create your own personal. I have one. It's my own personal chat or my own personal GPT, and so everything that is fed into there, I've fed into there. So every response that I get from my chat answers based on its knowledge base that came from me. So if I say every second Tuesday of the month, how is my mood tracking on that day? And it'll tell me. So you'll start to see trends in the way that you are maybe responding to things, or your mental well-being, or your physical well-being, or if people tend to have highs and lows, you'll start to see those patterns. And it's not based on generalities, it's based on you yourself. And that can be done with any of those attributes. So emotional intelligence, any of those attributes can be measured in that same way. So that's how I see it impacting my particular little teeny part of the organization. But in terms of how it's going to affect jobs, that's
an economic problem right there. I'm always just curious, like how people who grew up with basically a device in their hands, like, and as technology is rapidly changing, I'm a upper millennial, so I remember a time where a lot of the stuff was analog, and then I grew up with so I have like a good view of both worlds, and I adapt really well to the changing times. Whereas like Gen Z has grown up with this stuff. And then, all of us are kind of learning the AI stuff over the last couple of years. And I'm just wondering, because they are probably quicker to adapt to technology and use it to their advantage, both at work and in life, what they're doing with it right now and how it's going to change their career development.
So that is a really interesting question that I've been trying to research lately, and there isn't a whole lot of data on this yet. But my hunch is that when people say they're lazy or they want to get done, they get done. They only want to work 8 hours or 6 hours. It could be that they're more efficient than we ever were, right?
Right.
So, and that,
yes,
yeah,
that's what I've been thinking too, because I'm like, I love technology. I use it throughout my day. I've been using AI for things that I used to do manually, and I'm able to get so much more done. Granted, I still work and I'm just producing more, but I imagine like if Gen Z and other people can use these technologies to get their work done in 4 hours instead of 8, shouldn't we be okay with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder why. I mean, that's innovation, right? We're becoming more efficient, and there will be fallout from that. Maybe there won't need to be as many people in the organization. So there probably could be fallout from that, which again, that's something that we don't know yet. And I don't know how to even predict that, but I am watching it. I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah. On the career development front, you mentioned that this Gen Z really cares about growth and development. What's the best way to engage them?
Okay, this is a tough answer. I realize this is a tough answer, but the best way to engage them is the way that they want to be engaged. And so by that, I mean that the first step, let's assume that they're in the organization. Let's assume that that the postings have become attribute driven, and not driven, but in alignment with skill based. So skill and attribute. So let's assume someone's in the organization. There are, again, I use AI a lot with my clients. There are ways to understand. So for example, I've come up with about 10 attributes that I've identified as those that are most key to high performance and great leadership. So testing on those attributes and saying, okay, well, some of them are very obvious, right? Confidence. People with confidence tend to be looked upon with a little bit more respect, which isn't always, they shouldn't necessarily always be treated that way, but that's sort of what happens. So you can measure these attributes and say, okay, well, you are super strong in all of these, but these are the 3 I might consider opportunities for you to even become stronger, particularly if you say that 2 levels up, you want to be in this role. In order to be in this role, these are the attributes that you should try and hone in on. And engaging them in that way, and not just peanut butter spreading a development program across the whole organization, but saying, okay, these are the attributes that you can work to build on. And then going back to that ownership thing that I was talking about, it's on you to understand how to boost those, right? I can help you. I can help point you toward training programs. We may even have some, like the company that has a psychologist on staff. We may even have some, but if not, I'm telling you right now, if this is the role that you want, and these are the attributes that you're weaker on, not weak, but a little bit weaker on, then it's on you really to learn those skills. Up until this point, most of us, they're young, coming out of school even, most people have been told what to take. What you need to do this, you need to learn this is the skill that you should have. And they never have had to take ownership of their own situation, their own progress. And I think that that's got to change.
We've covered a lot of ground in here. I'm trying to think of what haven't I asked you? You read a ton. You read a lot of research papers too. Give me something else that I haven't asked you that you found so fascinating about Gen Z in all the research you've been doing.
Fascinating about Gen Z. I'm fascinated by so much about Gen Z. I thought you were going to say, what can corporations do? Gen Z, what fascinates me about Gen Z, what fascinates me about the whole topic of Gen Z is how people are so baffled by them. I don't understand why it's so baffling that they want to have a great work-life balance, and they want to be developed, and they want to have successful careers that align with their values. I don't think it's that I don't think it's that confusing. I think
No.
the difficult part is, okay, now we know. It's just like a customer. When you know what your customer wants, can you deliver? We know what they want. We can deliver. We just need to innovate, just like any good organization does, to meet the needs of their customer. This is, in my opinion, the most important customer an organization has at this point, because that population is growing in their workforce.
Yeah. That's well said, because I remember, I've been podcasting a long time, and I remember 10 years ago talking about millennials. And I'm a millennial, but I remember there's a whole host of articles and research papers and whatever else about like this generation, we can't figure them out. Well, guess what? Employers figured them out, and now a lot of them are leaders. Like myself, I'm in a leadership position and leading companies, and now we're talking about Gen Z. So like it's just every generation that comes after these big generations in the workplace, we're going to still be talking about it like this. We just need to ask the right questions, seek to understand, be curious, just like they are, and we'll be fine.
We will be fine, and we'll be better off, right? What do we want people to be standing still? No, we want them out there running and hustling and trying to find better ways to do things.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Kat, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Where can people connect with you or learn more about your work? You're doing a ton of work in this area, and you've got some good stuff cooking.
Yeah, so my website is Kat Walsh Group, katwalshgroup.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn. And my email is on my website. My phone number's on my website. So I'm happy to talk to anybody.
My guest today has been Kat Walsh. Kat, thanks for coming on.